Gray light filtered through the narrow windows of San Quentin State Prison, as if even the sun hesitated to witness what was about to unfold within those cold, unyielding walls. Ethan Cole lay motionless on the steel bed in his isolation cell. His eyes were fixed on the old clock hanging on the wall. In 3 hours, the needle would mark the exact moment he was to be lethally injected. 5 years of appeals had failed. 5 years of pleading innocence in vain, his cries never once swaying the heart of anyone in the system that had condemned him. The steady sound of footsteps echoed, shattering the thick silence. Warden Eleanor Briggs stopped in front of the bars, her face a mask forged by too many mornings like this, where death was part of the job. "Cole," she said calmly, "any final request will be approved." Ethan looked straight into her eyes, his voice hoarse and slow like dragging over gravel. He had only one thing to ask, to see his ex-lover, Clara Hayes. The warden frowned slightly, her gaze flickering with a hint of emotion, then nodded briefly. "I'll arrange it." As she walked away, the iron door clanged shut, with a resounding echo, and Ethan closed his eyes. That small request would set off a chain of events that would change everything. Ethan Cole had once stood tall in the military ranks, carrying the confidence and discipline of a special agent who had served in brutal war zones. At 38, his sturdy shoulders were now bowed under the weight of a sentence that had stolen 5 years of his life. The deep wrinkles around his eyes spoke of long, sleepless nights, days lived in silence, and fading hope. Before everything collapsed, Ethan worked as a security expert for major corporations in San Diego, a man trusted, respected, with a clear future. It was there that he met Clara Hayes, an investigative reporter for the Los Angeles Chronicle, a woman who was intelligent, brave, and believed in the truth to an extreme. They met while jointly investigating the financial scandal of businessman Michael Westcott. Amid long nights under dim lamps, sharing confidential information, love blossomed, but 2 weeks after they planned to move in together, Westcott was murdered in his San Diego penthouse. Ethan's fingerprints appeared on the murder weapon, and his account received a mysterious transfer. Clara, trusting the evidence, testified against him in court. The case closed quickly. A death sentence was handed down, and his name became a symbol of betrayal and guilt. For 5 years behind bars, Ethan held one single belief: he did not kill anyone. Someone had exploited him, set him up, and Clara, the woman he loved, had unwittingly aided it. Now, in the cold death row cell, as dawn crept up the stone walls like streaks of ash, he maintained a calm gaze. Behind those eyes was a truth no one knew, a truth waiting to be spoken, starting from the final moment of his life. In a small apartment in the heart of Los Angeles, Clara Hayes lived a quiet and solitary life. The 7th-floor unit overlooked a perpetually congested and dusty highway, but inside, everything was neat to the point of coldness. On the walls, old photos from her days as an investigative reporter for the Los Angeles Chronicle still hung intact, images of a confident woman full of ideals, with a determined gaze before the camera lens. But that gaze had extinguished 5 years ago, since the day she stood on the witness stand and pointed at the man she once loved, declaring him guilty. Clara had never forgiven herself since that moment. The phone rang amid a lethargic morning, making her freeze. A low, calm female voice came through the line, Warden Eleanor Briggs, from San Quentin State Prison. The warden briefed her succinctly. Inmate Ethan Cole had requested to see her as his final wish before execution. Clara was silent for a long time, unsure how to respond. That name, after all those years, still tightened her heart. Part of her wanted to hang up immediately, bury everything in oblivion. But the weaker, more painful part wanted to know why he wanted to see her, after everything that had happened. That night, she didn't sleep. On the table was a copy of the article from that year, with the bold headline, "Security Expert Ethan Cole Convicted of Murder." She read every word over and over as if punishing herself. Regret, fear, anger, and curiosity blended into a storm in her mind. She wondered, if she hadn't testified that day, if she had believed him one more time, would everything be different? At dawn the next day, as the first sunlight touched the window glass, Clara packed her things, threw on a long coat, and stepped out. She drove her old car north, merging into the endless flow of traffic on Interstate I-5 towards San Quentin. The California sky was pale blue, distant hills sliding past the window like faded memories. In the car, the radio played softly with monotonous news bulletins, but she heard nothing but the wind and her pounding heart. With each mile that passed, images from the past resurfaced one by one. The evening they argued in the San Diego apartment, Ethan's eyes when he was handcuffed, the words she testified in the courtroom, everything intertwined, making her feel like she was driving backward in time, returning to the moment of her greatest guilt. She didn't know if she was going to San Quentin to hear his final words or to find a way to redeem herself. But deep down, Clara understood. This wasn't just a trip to close the past. It might be the start of something she had never dared face. The truth. The iron gate of the death row section closed behind her, the long metallic screech echoing in the narrow hallway, making Clara feel as if the air was being sucked from her lungs. Warden Briggs led her through the gray, cold cell blocks, each footstep resounding on the concrete floor like the hammering of fate's nails. The stench of mold and harsh disinfectant mixed in the air, burning her throat. Fluorescent lights cast down on the bars, distorting the faces inside into warped patches of light and shadow. No one spoke, only Briggs's shoes echoed steadily, like counting down the remaining time. At the end of the hallway, Briggs stopped before a thick door, looking at Clara with a stern yet sympathetic gaze. 15 minutes, she said softly, then signaled the guard to unlock it. The iron latch clicked, and the door opened into a small room where Ethan Cole was waiting. He looked up as she entered, and in that moment, the world seemed to stop. 5 years had passed like a hazy streak of smoke, but his eyes were still the ones she remembered, deep, calm, and holding something both resolute and shattered. Clara stood still, not daring to approach. In that room, amid the hum of the air conditioner and the pale white light, two people who had once loved each other, once destroyed each other, faced one another for the first time in 5 years. No one spoke. The silence stretched, thick as a second wall between them. Ethan was thinner, his face gaunt, but there was still something defiant in his posture, as if even chained, he refused to collapse. She tried to say something, but found no fitting words. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. His voice was low, hoarse, pulled from the depths of his chest. He spoke about the case, about things he had never said before, and affirmed his innocence. He recounted that night, that he had gone to Westcott's apartment to retrieve security contract documents, leaving before the murder occurred. He mentioned a small detail, one only someone truly present would know. Westcott always played classical music at exactly 10 p.m., and always drank bourbon in a crystal glass engraved with M.W. at the bottom. But that night, the glass was empty and no music played. He said that when he entered, someone had been there before him. Clara fell silent. She remembered reading the crime scene report herself, but the detail about the glass had never been recorded. It was something she had seen in a private photo Westcott sent her while they worked together, something no one else knew. Her heart pounded erratically. Each of Ethan's words hammered at the belief she had built over 5 years. She tried to keep her voice steady, but her eyes betrayed her emotions. She asked how he could remember those things, how he could know, and he just looked straight at her, saying he hadn't forgotten a single detail of that night, because it had destroyed his entire life. Clara felt part of herself crumbling. She remembered how she had stood in the courtroom, repeating the police statements like a machine, believing she was doing the right thing. Now, facing that man, she realized her certainty was starting to crack. The room grew stifling, each breath compressed. Ethan continued, not justifying, just speaking slowly and firmly, that someone had exploited both him and her, turning their love into a pretext to conceal another crime. He didn't beg for forgiveness or seek pity. He just wanted her to know that the truth wouldn't die with his sentence. Clara wanted to argue, to cling to what she had believed for 5 years, but the words wouldn't come. Everything around her spun, the ringing in her ears blending with her pounding heart. The wall between them was no longer iron but memory. The rainy evening in San Diego, his laughter, his hand holding hers in the yellow light. It all came back clearly, mixed with pain. When Briggs knocked to signal time was up, Clara jolted awake from a dream. Ethan just nodded faintly in farewell, saying nothing more. She stood, walked out without looking back, but tears had fallen without her noticing. Outside, the long hallway was cold, but inside her was colder. Everything she had believed, everything she had chosen, now shook to its roots. As the iron door closed behind her, Clara knew that meeting hadn't closed the past as she intended. It opened something far more terrifying. The truth she might have helped bury. Back in Los Angeles, Clara felt the city was somehow different, the familiar streets now strange, neon lights reflecting on the rain-wet pavement, reminding her of the cold glow in the cell she had just left. She didn't turn on the lights when entering her apartment, letting only the faint streetlight filter through the curtains, casting a gloomy blue-gray over the room. On the table was her old laptop, surrounded by dusty files from old investigations she had never brought herself to throw away. Her hand trembled slightly as she opened it, the screen flickering to life, along with dozens of archived files she thought she'd never touch again. But now, Ethan's voice echoed in her head, every word, every detail he recounted in the cell, and she knew she couldn't ignore it. She opened the folder named Westcott Files, locked for years, and entered the old password her fingers still remembered by heart. Inside were hundreds of emails, notes, document photos, the things that had helped her write the investigative series on Michael Westcott's real estate empire. Back then, she believed she had seen the whole truth. But rereading, each line seemed to tell a different story. Amid exchanges about projects and financial papers, one name stood out repeatedly, Leonard Pierce, the judge who presided over Ethan Cole's trial. Clara paused, her heart racing. In the emails, Westcott mentioned a powerful friend in the courts, and an agreement ensuring legal safety for coastal projects. Attached files were copies of contracts and transfers from shell companies to an account under L. Pierce Holdings. This data wasn't coincidence, and Clara knew it. She scrolled frantically, growing chills with each read. In another email, Westcott wrote that Pierce requires assurance that if anything happens, the coastal haven files must be handled discreetly. The phrase "handled discreetly" sent shivers down her spine. That very judge had rejected all of Ethan's appeals, sentencing him to death in a calm, chilling voice. Now Clara saw another connection between the court, prosecution, and Westcott, a network of power that Ethan might have unwittingly touched. She flipped back to her old testimony transcript, the part where she confirmed seeing Ethan leave Westcott's building that night. She remembered saying around 10 p.m., but the official report recorded 10:45. A small difference, but in a criminal case, enough for a death sentence. She searched further in the newsroom's archived inbox, finding an email from an anonymous source sent that year, titled "The Fixer," the person who handled troubles for powerful businessmen. Clara had never opened it, as the case was closed. Now she did, and saw an attachment noting a man named Wilson Grant, the one behind erasing security camera data, the night Westcott died. Her heart nearly stopped. The pieces were falling into place, and the full picture she once believed was truth was collapsing before her eyes. Clara sat motionless, her mind reeling between guilt and fear. 5 years ago she had trusted the system too much, believed evidence couldn't lie, that testifying was right, but if it was all a meticulously staged play, then she had helped condemn an innocent man. Ethan's image in the cell flashed clearly in her mind, his eyes when mentioning the MW engraved bourbon glass, his hoarse voice saying he just wanted her to know the truth. Guilt surged, choking her. Clara buried her head on the table, the screen lines blurring through tears. Outside, distant sirens wailed, traffic light reds and blues flickering on her face like a panicked heartbeat. She knew reopening this case meant facing not just justice but her own guilt. But thinking of Ethan, counting his final minutes in that cold room, Clara understood she had no choice. The memories she tried to forget for 5 years now became her only drive to stand. She wiped her tears, printed all the data, and looked at the screen one last time. Ethan's voice still rang in her head. The truth doesn't die with my sentence. And in that moment Clara decided she would uncover what the system tried to hide, even if it meant overturning her own beliefs and past. While Clara drowned in sleepless nights amid Los Angeles files, in Northern California, Detective Warren Hale, the one who had arrested Ethan Cole, couldn't sleep either. The morning radio news about the execution made his chest heavy, like a stone placed on his conscience. For 5 years he told himself the case was right, evidence perfect, sentence just, but deep down, something never settled. He was used to human guilt and lies, but the haunting after each execution kept him from peace. On his desk in a small Oakland apartment, the old Ethan Cole file lay among others, cover yellowed, pages stained with coffee. Hale reopened each page, reading slowly as if searching for something buried. Forensic reports, witness statements, scene exams, everything looked complete, as he remembered. But at the fingerprint analysis, he froze. Next to inconclusive, meaning undetermined, was a red pen strike-through, and new text, partial match confirmed. The handwriting slanted, not the forensic text he knew. Hale frowned, unease spreading. He pulled the original digital copy, compared handwriting, and as suspected, the original had no changes. Someone interfered. The report writer quit right after the trial. Hale leaned back, staring out the window. Street light reflected on his half-empty wine glass, and in that moment, he realized he might have arrested the wrong man. He remembered Ethan being led to court, still calm-eyed, saying he was innocent. Then Hale thought it was just criminal confidence. Now, after 5 years, that gaze haunted like a warning. He stood, grabbed his coat, stuffed the file in his bag, and left. Night wind from the bay blew cold, sky overcast with coming rain. His car sped through the dark, toward San Quentin. En route, he called Warden Eleanor Briggs, voice hoarse and urgent. He briefed his findings, tampered evidence, doubts on investigation integrity. Briggs silent a few seconds, then, "Get here now. We don't have much time." By arrival, dawn broke. Briggs waited in her office, face calm but eyes anxious. He placed the file on the desk, pointed to the handwriting, explained details. Briggs examined closely, lips tight. Then, "You sure?" Hale nodded. "Sure as knowing I might have condemned the wrong man." The room fell silent. The wall clock ticked, reminding only hours until final closure. Briggs paced. Then, "I'll contact the governor's office, but we need something more concrete to stay the execution." Hale nodded, eyes burning with rare determination after nearly 30 years in the field. "I'll find it," he said. "If someone altered files, there'll be traces." They shook hands, no more words needed. Outside, sky turned ashen, first dawn rays, slipping through narrow windows, cold and pale as the truth they faced. In that moment, Hale knew all experience, all reputation meant nothing, if he didn't do right now. For the first time in years, his heart pounded not from fear, but from a feeling he thought long dead, conscience. While Clara tossed amid Los Angeles files, in another corner of California, Warren Hale, the cop who arrested Ethan Cole, sat motionless in his cramped apartment. Morning radio mentioning execution time choked him. For 5 years, he told himself the case was solid, evidence undeniable, but each wrongful conviction news made him think of Ethan's calm face in custody. He stood, pulled the dusty old file from the cabinet, yellowed pages clipped with notes. Flipping to fingerprint report, something wrong, inconclusive struck through in red ink, new partial match confirmed. Strange slanted handwriting, not the known text. Chill down his spine, Hale leaned in, then checked his personal computer against old database digital copy. Original unchanged, no edits. Someone intervened after he signed off. In his head echoed the prisoner's voice. "I didn't kill anyone, detective." He dismissed it then as criminal talk. Now, it accused him. Hale grabbed coat, stuffed file in leather bag, drove straight to San Quentin. Sky not fully light, air thick with mist. He called Warden Eleanor Briggs, voice hoarse and urgent. Briggs listened, said little, ordered, "Get here now." Half-hour later, Hale entered the warden's office, dark circles, hands trembling from cold. He placed file on desk, pointed to strange writing, summarized findings and suspicions. Briggs flipped pages, stared long, exhaled. "If true, we have a serious problem," she said quietly. "And only hours before it's irreversible." Hale rasped, "I don't want another death on my mistake." Both silent, only clock ticking. Finally Briggs grabbed phone, dialed governor's office, while Hale prepped verification list. As they planned, faint early light filtered through glass, casting ashen hue on files. In that moment, Warren Hale knew medals, years of service meaningless, if he ignored conscience again. He didn't know if he could save Ethan Cole, but he knew this time he wouldn't let justice stay silent. Morning at San Quentin started with cold winds blowing in from the bay, sky thick gray, heavy as the death row air. Clara drove madly along the coastal road, clock showing less than 20 minutes to execution. She could barely breathe, hands gripping the wheel, mind reeling between fear and fragile hope. On the passenger seat, hastily printed files, emails, statements, evidence from her all-night search. As prison gates appeared, her heart nearly burst. She braked hard, jumped out, yelled at guards she needed Warden Briggs immediately. The guard checked his watch, hesitated, but at Clara's desperate eyes, radioed in. Less than 5 minutes later, Briggs and Detective Hale appeared, faces mirroring tension and fear. Clara handed over the trembling files, voice choking as she explained, Westcott's emails, Judge Pierce's name, transfers, Wilson Grant. Hale flipped quickly, recognizing signatures and data matching his morning checks. No doubt, this was strong enough to reopen the case. Briggs called the governor's office immediately. The room filled with dialing tones, wind whistling through cracks, 3 heartbeats racing time. "We have new evidence indicating possible error in Ethan Cole case," Briggs said fast, voice unbelievably calm. On the other end Roquant, the governor's aide skeptical, demanded immediate authenticated data. Hale plugged in USB, sent all documents with handwriting verification report, and supplemental statements. Each second stretched like hours. Clara stood frozen, fingers digging into chair arm, eyes glued to Briggs's phone screen, awaiting fate's verdict. When the callback rang, all held breath. Briggs answered, listened seconds, then tense shoulders eased slightly. "Stay of execution granted," she said softly. 2 hours. The words tore through the stifling air. Clara staggered, nearly falling, tears flooding in ultimate relief. Ethan wouldn't die, at least not yet. Hale exhaled, leaning against wall. Briggs gripped phone tight, ordered halt to all execution prep. Internal alarms blared through death row. Guards received stop orders for lethal injection. Clara covered mouth, stifling sobs as Briggs turned. "You can see him. 5 minutes, no more." She nodded frantically, nearly running after the warden through the long hallway, flickering lights reflecting on floor like life clock ticks. As cell door opened, Ethan looked up, weary eyes mixed with surprise at her. They gazed. No words needed. Eyes conveyed change. Clara stepped closer, breath catching, held out documents. "It's not over," she said, voice trembling but firm. "This case isn't finished." Ethan looked long. In his eyes, for first time in 5 years, a spark, not hope, but belief. Outside, stay alarms echoed through blocks, sound spreading like word that justice, though late, still had chance to awaken. In the small room, as Briggs watched silently, she knew the 2 hours granted saved not just a life, but started a war against a system. Clara gripped Ethan's cold hand, feeling weak but steady pulse at his wrist, and in that moment, she knew she wouldn't stop until full truth, even if it cost her everything. That night, San Francisco did not sleep. In front of the federal courthouse on Golden Gate Avenue, television vans lined up in a long row, camera lights illuminating the plaza that was accustomed only to the quiet of daytime trials. News of the last-minute stay of execution for death row inmate Ethan Cole had spread across all channels, triggering a public shockwave. Inside the courthouse, the white light from hundreds of bulbs reflected off the cold stone walls, creating an atmosphere of solemnity that bordered on suffocating. The special hearing was convened urgently by order of federal Judge Marjorie Ellsworth, a woman renowned for her toughness and fairness, who had rejected dozens of appeals, but had also saved rare wrongful conviction cases. The clock struck nearly midnight when she stepped to the bench, her voice steady and commanding, silencing the buzzing room. Hearing in the matter of Ethan Cole, emergency request for stay of execution and re-examination of evidence. Below, Clara sat in the witness section, clutching a black-bound file folder, next to Detective Hale with his somber expression. Across the aisle, Prosecutor Victor Langston, the man who had convicted Ethan, wore a dark suit, his cold face struggling to maintain confidence. Behind them, the press gallery was packed, keyboards and recorders clacking incessantly. When called to speak, Clara stood, taking a deep breath. Under the harsh white lights, her face was tense but resolute. Her voice did not tremble as she feared. It was clear, each word forged like cooled iron. She recounted discovering the email chain between Michael Westcott and officials, suspicious money transfers, Judge Leonard Pierce's name appearing in multiple exchanges, and data that had vanished from public records. She submitted a USB containing all evidence to the court, along with independently authenticated copies. When the lines appeared on the large screen in the courtroom, "Ensure case is closed, Pierce will take care of it," the gallery gasped. Judge Ellsworth banged the gavel for order. Clara continued, describing the anonymous tip that sent her files on Wilson Grant, a self-proclaimed fixer for Westcott. Her voice choked as she said that for 5 years, she had believed the verdict, believed she was doing right, but now she could not stay silent, knowing she might have helped condemn an innocent man. Those words silenced the room for seconds, only the rustle of pens and sighs from spectators. After Clara, Detective Hale was called. He stood firmly, despite the lights making his face more gaunt. He described his findings: the tampered forensic report, falsified fingerprint results, archived files altered after he handed them to the prosecutor's office. Hale presented excerpts, proving the original, said inconclusive, while the court-submitted version changed to partial match confirmed. He spoke clearly, slowly, as if each sentence was a confession to his own conscience. "I don't know who did this, but I know only the prosecutor had access to the files after I signed off." Langston gripped his briefcase strap, his face paling slightly. When his turn came, he stood, voice calm but clearly suppressing anger. "Your Honor, I object. This is emotional testimony from a former detective, and the data lacks technical proof of who edited it." The judge signaled the court IT specialist to display metadata logs, timestamps, and last access accounts. The text on the screen froze the room. Last modified by V. Langston, District Attorney's Office, 3:12 a.m., April 18, 2019. Langston shot up, starting to speak, but the judge banged the gavel 3 times hard, ordering him to sit. A murmur swept the room. Reporters rushed to type, phones flashing, social media exploding with headlines, "Tampered evidence in Ethan Cole case. Prosecutor Langston suspected of manipulation." Judge Ellsworth raised an eyebrow, ordered a 10-minute recess for independent verification. During that time, Clara sat, hands ice-cold, staring at the ceiling without seeing. Hale beside her whispered, "We did the right thing." When the hearing resumed, technicians presented independent verification results, confirming the report was altered via internal admin access from Langston's account. He sat silent, sweat beading on his forehead, but still managed, "I only access to review, no intent to edit." The judge stared long, then asked, "If just reviewing, why change inconclusive to matches, and why at the same time were supplemental files deleted?" No answer. Langston fell silent, hands clenched into fists on the table. Clara looked at him, and in that moment, she saw something terrifying: the coldness of someone who used justice as a tool for power. Outside, the crowd gathering at the courthouse gates grew, banners reading, "Stop the execution, reopen the case" everywhere, camera lights blazing through the night. Inside, the hearing dragged on nearly 2 more hours. Forensic experts, data technicians, Ethan's newly appointed lawyer, presented one by one. Each detail fit like pieces of a larger conspiracy. Judge Ellsworth listened intently, taking notes, and when the clock struck 2 a.m., she set down her pen, voice ringing in the silence. Based on the new evidence presented, the court temporarily suspends the execution of Ethan Cole's death sentence for 48 hours to conduct an expanded investigation. The execution order is stayed until official conclusions. In that moment, the room erupted. Reporters rushed out, phones rang everywhere, sighs of relief, sobs mixed with thunderous applause. Clara stood still, hands clasped tight, tears streaming uncontrollably. Hale gently placed a hand on her shoulder, eyes heavy but brighter than ever. "He has more time," he said. "And maybe, justice too." In the back rows, a few men in dark suits quietly slipped out, exchanging cold glances. They knew the real storm was just beginning. As the judge left the bench, camera lights still swept Clara's face, the reporter who once wrote to condemn her lover, now the one who saved his life. Outside the courthouse, San Francisco's night was damp, salt air mixed with cold mist, but in Clara's heart, for the first time in 5 years, there was a different warmth. Not fragile hope, but true belief that truth, no matter how deeply buried, could be unearthed if someone was brave enough to dig. After that dawn hearing, all of San Francisco seemed to wake in shock. News of the state execution and corruption allegations spread like wildfire in the wind, unleashing an unprecedented public storm. Media outlets ran photos of Clara leaving the courthouse under flashing lights, with sensational headlines. "Reporter who convicted lover returns to save him." But beneath the noisy coverage, another investigation was launching, quiet, urgent, and dangerous. In the FBI's temporary San Francisco office, Detective Hale sat across from Senior Agent Ryan Keller, head of the Special Corruption Task Force in the state justice system. Clara was there too, eyes ringed from sleeplessness but sharp, with printed data from the Westcott Files folder in front of her. Hale briefed his findings and the courtroom events, then slid Keller a USB with copies of financial transactions between Westcott and shell companies. Keller plugged it in. The screen filled with lines: Pierce Holdings LLC, Langston Trust Fund, Coastal Haven Development. Each linked to Cayman Islands accounts, transfer dates matching Judge Leonard Pierce's legal decisions. Clara pointed to one line: "Here, March 10th transaction, 2 weeks before Westcott's murder. Over $2 million from Pierce Holdings to Langston Foundation." In the email, Westcott said he wouldn't stay silent anymore. Keller nodded, typed quick retrieval commands, and the screen showed a web of connected transactions. "He was about to talk," Hale said softly, and they silenced him before he could. Clara clenched her fists, the thought chilling her. Ethan had been perfectly positioned as the fall guy, someone who worked closely with Westcott, with a fabricated motive and a witness in her, the one person who could make the jury fully believe the conviction. Keller ordered his tech team to trace the money while signing subpoenas for Langston and Judge Pierce. Within 24 hours, bank records, investment contracts, and property deeds were seized. The deeper they dug, the clearer it became. Coastal Haven, promoted as the West Coast's green development icon, was actually a hundreds of millions money laundering scheme through ghost companies. Pierce legalized building permits. Langston ensured favorable rulings in lawsuits. Westcott coordinated finances until he got scared and wanted to expose it all. A final email from Westcott to Clara, never reaching her inbox, was recovered by the FBI. Short content: "If anything happens to me, don't believe what they say about Ethan." Reading those lines, Clara broke down. She had thought she was the only one brave enough to pursue truth, but she had been used to bury it. 2 days later, at San Quentin, Warden Eleanor Briggs received official notice from the federal court. Ethan Cole's death sentence was indefinitely revoked, and the case reopened for new investigation. She personally went to his cell, standing before the bars where he had lived 5 years, holding the red-stamped paper. "Cole," she said firmly, but softer than usual, "I'm authorized to inform you your death sentence is lifted. You'll be moved to temporary detention pending retrial, and, as a witness, not a defendant." Ethan stood silent, eyes blinking rapidly as if disbelieving. Briggs looked a moment longer, then softly, "Temporary, but justice has started speaking." As the door opened, hallway light slanted through the bars onto Ethan's gaunt face. For the first time in years, he breathed deeply without smelling disinfectant or rust, only the scent of freedom, fragile as it was. Clara waited outside as he was led out with loosened cuffs. They looked at each other, silent, and in their eyes were both gratitude and something unnamed. But between them remained distance, not bars, but 5 years of loss and things that could not return. Meanwhile, the FBI investigation quickly spread to California's financial and judicial circles. Media exposed shady deals. Images of Judge Leonard Pierce leaving home surrounded by agents hit every front page. Langston was stripped of prosecutorial authority, charged with bribery and evidence tampering. Social media overflowed with outraged posts, interviews, debates on the justice system and death penalty. In a temporary FBI conference room, Hale and Clara watched live news. When Langston appeared cuffed and head bowed, Hale said quietly, "No victory erases mistakes, but at least this time, we didn't turn away." Clara nodded slightly, eyes on the window where dawn rose over San Francisco. In the pale light, she remembered first seeing Ethan in the cell. His gaze held no blame, no resentment, only weariness and a remnant of trust. Now that gaze kept her standing. A week later, the court officially vacated Ethan Cole's death sentence. He was transferred from San Quentin to federal witness housing, awaiting new trial. As Briggs saw him out the prison gate, she said slowly, "You're not fully free yet, Cole, but you have what no one else can give, a chance to be heard." Ethan smiled, bowed his head in thanks, then looked back at the stone walls, once thought his final place. Now, just a memory. Clara waited outside in her old coat, hair wind-tossed. As he approached, she said softly, "They believe now." Ethan nodded lightly, gaze lingering on her eyes, warm yet distant. Between them was restored truth, but love still bore unhealable cracks. They walked through the gate under a thinning gray sky brightening, amid reporters calling names and flashing cameras. Justice's light had finally reached, but the price was 5 years of life, a shattered love, and faith forever imperfect. The massive iron gate of San Quentin opened with a resounding clang, signaling the start of a different era. Early morning light flooded in, illuminating Ethan Cole's gaunt but calm face as he stepped out, hands unshackled. Outside, a crowd of reporters and supporters had waited since dawn, mics and cameras raised high, flashes popping non-stop, cheers mixed with his name, signs reading "Justice for Ethan Cole" swaying in the wind. He squinted, unaccustomed to the light and the sound of freedom, after 5 years in silence. A few reporters pushed forward, voices lost in the crowd. "Mr. Cole, do you have anything to say to the public after your death sentence was vacated?" Ethan paused a second, eyes fixed far ahead, where, at the fence's end, a woman stood still amid the throng. Without answering, he kept walking, each step breaking invisible chains that had bound him half a decade. Clara stood there in a gray coat, face faintly weary, but eyes bright as ever. When their gazes met, all surrounding noise seemed to fade. No words needed. Between them was silence deeper than any speech, silence of lost years, mistakes, and forgiveness. She nodded slightly, a nod substituting for words neither could say. Ethan stopped before her, sea wind tossing a few strands of hair. He smiled faintly, but truly to his eyes' depths. In that moment, they were no longer convict and witness, betrayer and betrayed, just two people who had weathered a storm, both scarred. Behind, Detective Warden Hale emerged from administration, holding his old cap. He watched the scene quietly, then turned to waiting reporters. "I'm officially retiring today," he said, voice hoarse but firm, "because I learned one thing: doing right isn't just following the law, it's admitting when you're wrong." Those around fell silent, then someone clapped softly, the sound spreading like a wave. Hale turned to Ethan, nodded a final goodbye, and Warden Eleanor Briggs, who had seen it all, stood by the gate, hands clasped in front, eyes both stern and gentle. As Ethan passed, she said low, "For him alone, Sometimes humanity is stronger than the law, Cole. Today is one of those times. Ethan tilted his head, eyes grateful. Briggs watched him go, face calm but lips trembling slightly, like someone witnessing a rarity in her profession. A man leaving prison, not just surviving, but with light still in his eyes. As the gate closed behind, metal clanging like an ending, Ethan stopped beside Clara. Both looked to the distant sea, where gulls wheeled in the mist. Wind carried salt and freedom's scent, familiar yet strange. Where will you go now? The question in her eyes, unspoken. Ethan looked to the road leading to the highway, cars streaming away in pale sun. He didn't know, but one thing was certain. He wouldn't look back. Behind them, reporters, cameras, sea sounds blended, but between them only silence. In that moment, freedom tasted strange, sweet and bitter. Not joy, not victory, but relief mixed with loss. Clara turned, started to speak, but only smiled, eyes glistening. Ethan responded with a faint nod, then walked with her, leaving the gray walls that had imprisoned him for long years. Overhead, first sunlight pierced thick clouds, shining on the road ahead, a freedom scarred but hopeful. San Diego welcomed Ethan with the strangely gentle early summer sun, pale gold light spilling through the window of the small apartment he rented temporarily, reflecting on mottled walls as if to hide time's forgotten marks. The city was still noisy, streets still jammed, but to Ethan every sound felt alien. 5 years gone, the outside world had changed, while he carried prison's slow rhythm, waking early, brewing coffee without drinking, watching steam rise, pacing the short hallway like patrolling old memories. The apartment held little. A few old items, a wooden table, a worn upholstered armchair. On the table, the morning paper reported the formal arrests of Judge Leonard Pierce and prosecutor Victor Langston, the names that once condemned him to death. Below was Clara's photo in a short interview, headlined "Reporter Breaks Silence After Ethan Cole Case." He read without anger or joy. His emotions were like the sea outside, calm but frighteningly deep. Evening fell, he walked to the old beach, where he and Clara once sat hours talking work. Simple dreams of two young people, believing truth could save everything. The sea was the same, only the people different. Waves lapped gently, carrying wind and salty tang. He sat, hands clasped, staring blankly seaward. Light footsteps behind made him turn. Clara stood there in a simple white shirt, hair wind-tossed, eyes direct with sad serenity. Neither greeted. She came, sat beside him, close enough not to touch but not so far as strangers. They sat silent, listening to the sea, gulls, each other's breath. Time between them flowed like slow water. Finally Clara spoke softly, voice warm and weary. "I once thought justice was absolute, that if someone committed a crime, evidence was enough. But when you disappeared behind bars, I realized justice is never perfect. And sometimes our own beliefs make others pay the price." Ethan didn't reply, just gazed at the sea, eyes distant but no longer dark. "You saved me," he said at last, voice low but firm. "And you saved yourself." Clara smiled thinly, a smile fragile, as if freed from years of weight. "We both paid the price," she answered, and in her eyes, Ethan saw more truth than any apology. Between them, the once burning love had melted into quiet gratitude and empathy, a mature feeling needing no possession, no reclaiming. They sat long until sunset, red-orange light burning across the sea. Waves rolled in, lapping their feet, cold yet peaceful. Ethan turned, eyes gentle. "Will you stay in San Diego?" Clara shook her head lightly, wind-blowing hair across half her face. "I'm going to New York. A paper wants me to write about wrongful convictions and judicial reform. Maybe I should start over where there's no past." Ethan nodded, unsurprised. He knew she would never stand still, just as he couldn't return to who he was. He stood, offered his hand. She took it, cold but gripping tight. In the twilight, they looked at each other one last time. No promises, no ties, only understanding deeper than words. As Clara walked along the sand, her shadow stretched in the dying sun, wind-carrying waves murmur like a farewell song. Ethan stayed, watching until she faded in the mist, then turned to the sea, closed his eyes, breathed deep the salt and spray. Freedom, he realized, wasn't just stepping from bars, but learning to forgive others, and himself. In the waves crashing shore, he heard Clara's voice somewhere. Justice is never complete, but people can be. And Ethan smiled, letting wind carry away remaining pain, as if for the first time in years, he was truly free. 3 months later, Sacramento greeted early fall morning with pale gold sunlight covering the marble steps of the California State Capitol, where the Judiciary Committee held a special hearing on death penalty reform. Inside, the chamber was packed with reporters, legislators, and law students. At the podium, Ethan Cole, once death sentenced, now a living symbol of restored justice, stood in a simple gray suit, eyes calm but profound. Below, the audience sat silent, hanging on his words. His voice was low and slow, clear in the space. He recounted the journey from free man to convict, from faith in justice to despair, then back to light through the courage of people daring to believe truth. He named Detective Warren Hale, the officer who faced his own mistake, Warden Eleanor Briggs, who chose humanity over procedure, and finally Clara Hayes, who risked her reputation to bring truth to light. Each name stilled the room further, and when Ethan paused, voice choking, "I once thought justice was a luxury, existing only in law books. But today I know real justice is made by people, from courage to admit wrong and kindness to forgive." In the back rows, Clara sat quietly among the crowd, unassuming, not seeking attention. She just watched him, eyes deep and calm. When Ethan turned, their gazes met, no longer tangled, no longer tormented, only complete understanding, like two rivers once flowing opposite now meeting in the same sea. That look lasted seconds, but in it, all past seemed to dissolve. No sentence, no wound, only gratitude and forgiveness. A few in the chamber noticed, but no one spoke, for words would be superfluous. Ethan continued his closing remarks, speaking of needed judicial reform, the importance of independent evidence verification, and how easily people forget that behind every verdict is a real life, a family, a future. His voice held no resentment, only the calm of one who had walked through hell and returned. When he finished, the chamber rose, applause thundering, unending. But in Ethan's eyes, all sound faded. He saw only Clara smiling, a smile light as a breeze, no longer sad, no longer pained. Amid the crowd, she stood, nodded lightly, a silent farewell to a closed chapter. Ethan nodded back, hand tightening on his notes, like holding a piece of memory, then took a deep breath. As he stepped down from the podium, a few reporters rushed forward with questions, but he said only one sentence: "Truth doesn't come for revenge. It comes to remind us that trust can be reborn." Outside, the California sky was deep blue, wind rustling through the eucalyptus trees like time's whisper. Ethan paused on the steps, looking up at the towering building where he had just told his story. Then far ahead, where Clara was walking out the gate, her figure blending into the crowd, small but proud. He smiled, knowing they would not meet again, but it was no longer necessary. Between them was something beyond love and the past, forgiveness, reborn trust. In the still air, applause still echoed in his mind, blending with his heartbeat, reminding him that justice and humanity, when intertwined, can redeem even the most despairing souls. After the historic Sacramento hearing, public outcry swept across America like an unstoppable storm. Within 2 weeks, multiple investigations launched. Major outlets ran non-stop stories on the decade's biggest judicial scandal. Federal agents arrested Victor Langston at his lavish Beverly Hills mansion as he tried destroying a personal server with transfer data. In San Marino, Judge Leonard Pierce was handcuffed and led from his hilltop villa before reporters' lenses, face still coldly calm, but eyes betraying fear. FBI seized documents, clearly proved ties between the two and the Coastal Haven conglomerate, a bribery, money laundering, and legal manipulation ring spanning over a decade. Figures once heading review committees and major real estate firms were summoned one by one. The entire shadow power structure shook, and for the first time in years, Californians saw justice truly in motion. At the State Department of Justice press conference, Individuals who exposed the truth were honored. When Detective Warren Hale's name was called, the hall rose in applause. But he stepped to the podium, removed his glasses, looked around, and said briefly, "I don't deserve honor. The only one who does is the man who paid for our mistakes." He paused, voice hoarse with emotion. "I only did what I should have done 5 years ago." The word spread across social media, becoming a symbol of humility and atonement. Images of Hale leaving the hall, walking slowly but resolutely, were dubbed by the press the footsteps of conscience. Elsewhere, Clara Hayes closed her small San Francisco apartment, spending weeks writing the biggest investigative piece of her life. She titled it "The Man I Condemned." Over 10,000 words, it recounted her journey from believing false evidence to realizing she had helped strip an innocent man's life. In every sentence, Clara hid neither torment nor fear, nor sought excuses. She described Ethan not as a victim but as a person, flawed, resilient, and ultimately retaining faith in goodness. The article hit the Chronicle's front page, instantly shocking the nation. Millions of shares, hundreds of commentaries, TV programs, debating journalistic ethics, media power, and the line between truth and belief. Many criticized Clara, saying she was only atoning with her pen, but just as many praised her courage to face her past. Several law and journalism schools adopted her piece as teaching material. In the conclusion, Clara wrote, "I once believed justice was something won in courtrooms, but now I understand real justice exists only when we dare admit we were wrong." The article, with all its raw honesty, left many silent after reading. In San Diego, Ethan Cole found the paper in his mailbox, sent by Clara herself, with one line, "For the truth we both lost," and found again. He opened it, sat by the window, read each line slowly. Memories flooded back, the freezing cell, Clara's eyes on her first visit, Hale's voice at the hearing, all blending like the final reel of a life's film. Each passage tightened his chest, but no longer with pain, only release. At the last line, he paused long, smiled. Outside, waves lapped steadily, salt and wind mingling in the air. He set the paper on the table, looked seaward, where the sun sank toward the horizon, brilliant and peaceful. For the first time in years, his mind was completely empty. No anger, no regret, no questions. Only a deep stillness affirming that every wound heals, every loss finds meaning. Ethan closed his eyes, breathed long, feeling free breath fill his chest. Outside, the crimson sky faded to purple, gulls crossing the horizon. In that moment, he knew he was truly liberated, not just from the death sentence, but from the invisible burden called the past. A year had passed since the truth was revealed. California's sea and sky had changed, but for Ethan Cole, everything felt like yesterday. He lived quietly in Oceanside, in a small house overlooking endless sand, where each dawn he sat on the porch, listening to waves and writing lines for his memoir titled, "The Last Truth I Told." It was not a tragic autobiography, but a journey seeking meaning in justice and forgiveness, not just for those who harmed him, but for himself. The first page read, "They can take your freedom, but they cannot make you stop believing in truth." Each day he wrote a few pages, between long beach walks, where wind carried salt and memories. On his desk, amid manuscript stacks and old photos, lay a new postcard, no return address, but handwriting he recognized instantly. Just a few short lines, "Wishing you peace." See, no more words needed, it was enough. Clara Hayes now lived in New York, a renowned investigative reporter who had traded her reputation to restore justice to a wrongly convicted man. Her postcard arrived like a breeze, not to rekindle the past, but as a gentle wish that both had passed through dark days intact. Ethan smiled, placed the postcard beside his fountain pen, where morning sun streamed through the old wooden window. Outside, the radio played the morning news. Federal court sentences former prosecutor Victor Langston and Judge Leonard Pierce to life without parole. California's biggest corruption case in a decade officially closes. He listened, feeling neither joy nor vindication, only gentle serenity spreading through his chest. Everything was finally complete. No one else had to die. No one else had to pay for others' sins. As the memoir's final chapter neared completion, Ethan left the desk, donned a jacket, and walked to the sand. Twilight fell, red-orange light blazing across the horizon. Waves crashed ashore, reflecting the sinking sun, brilliant as the final day's flame, not fading but full of life. He walked slowly, sand sinking underfoot, salty wind wrapping his clothes, waves whispering familiar and ancient. He remembered everything: the cold cell, the midnight hearing, Clara's gaze in the chamber, Hale's voice at the honoring, the hands that pulled him from the abyss. All appeared like fading film frames with his steps on the sand. When he stopped, Ethan looked skyward, where last light melted into water, golden then softening to velvet purple. In that moment, he realized his life was no longer measured by lost years, but by what remained: faith, gratitude, and the capacity to forgive. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket, wrote the memoir's final line: "Love may fade, trust may waver, but truth once found never vanishes. It lives in everyone brave enough to forgive." Wind blew stronger, carrying spray and sea salt, lightly turning the fresh pages. Ethan stood long, watching the sun sink into the sea like a farewell, then smiled. At the edge of darkness, he had found the final light, not from justice, not from love, but from the man he was, who had learned to let go, trust, and walk on through life. If you believe justice and compassion still have a place in this world, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss stories that touch the heart. Thank you for following to the end. See you in the next journeys of truth and hope.